by Reverend Mike Thompson on December 1st, 1996, here at UUFGC. I think you'll find his comments as relevant today as they were 26 years ago. And the title is, Can I Be a Christian and a UU Too? If I can find my piece of paper. Wow. Sorry. There's a page missing here. My apologies. I was all prepared. Had too much time. Well, maybe I should leave and come back. It got moved to another page. Sorry. We say that in Unitarian Universalist churches, we welcome diversity. But do we really mean what we say? Do we practice what we preach? Last Sunday in our congregation, this is Mike talking about last Sunday in Beaumont, 26 years ago, we affirmed the freedom of our pagan members to worship in the manner that best suits their spiritual needs. We supported their use of the outdoor sacred circle as a legitimate activity of the church. And of this issue, certainly a substantial majority of our members came down on the side of religious tolerance. We welcome diversity in other forms, or so we say. For example, our denomination, the Unitarian Universalist Association, recently launched a major campaign to assist our congregations in becoming more racially and ethnically inclusive. I'm sure that most of us would be utterly ashamed to be caught in the act of making a racist remark, which is not to say, of course, that we've all been successful in rooting out every trace of racism from our hearts and our conduct. That's something we'll have to keep working on for the rest of our lives. As another example, the blatant sexism of the past has become just that in our churches, a thing of the past. Unitarian Universalists were pioneers in the use of gender-inclusive language in worship. In addition, every position of responsibility in our congregations and our associations is open equally to women as well as men. In fact, we're ordaining so many women these days, by the turn of the century, they'll comprise over half of our professional ministers. Even homophobia, which still occasionally rears its ugly head, has been confronted and dealt with directly by most of our churches through the Welcoming Congregation program. And you know we are one. Many of our clergy are openly gay or lesbian, and just this summer, the General Assembly of the Unitarian Universalist Association went on record in support of the legalization of same-sex marriages. On this subject, as with so many others, we're out in front of most other denominations. Racial and ethnic minorities, feminists, gays, lesbians, bisexual, theists, atheists, humanists, and pagan all are welcome here. You might say that we're deliberately, even aggressively inclusive. But there's one group of people which frequently, without apology, becomes the object of our ridicule. Though they're found in Unitarian Universalist congregations in numbers far greater than most of us imagine, they often remain closeted for fear of insult or harassment. Though they represent one of the world's most revolutionary religious traditions, we often dismiss them as hopelessly reactionary. And though Unitarian Universalism would not exist had it not been for the convictions and courage of their predecessors, we sometimes act as if they're strangers and aliens under our roof. I'm referring, of course, to those among us who claim the name of Christian. They're present in almost every UU church and fellowship, and if you pay attention, you can usually identify them. They're the quiet ones. I myself am not a Christian, although I occasionally refer to myself as post-Christian, and I seldom preach from the Bible, although, as most of you know, I can when I want to. The historical figure of Jesus Christ interests me greatly, but he's not the center of my religious faith. And I'm acutely aware of the bloody persecutions that institutionalized Christianity has perpetuated down through the centuries, supposedly in his name. In fact, I recently preached a sermon or two on precisely this aspect of the Christian religion. But in saying these things, I don't mean to imply that Christianity can be dismissed as a legitimate theological option for UUs. Because many of us earlier in our lives felt ourselves the victims of Christian intolerance, we tend to think of it in derogatory terms. But to view the Christian tradition in this light only is to cut ourselves off from the paradoxical blessings of the Beatitudes. From the gentle example of Francis of Assisi, and from the powerful prophetic inspiration that motivated Martin Luther King Jr., it's also to be ignorant of our own heritage. Just as some Orthodox Christians tend to forget that Jesus was a Jew, so some Unitarian Universalists seem to forget that many of our own heroes, Michael Servetus, Faustus Socinus, John Murray, and Hosea Ballou, William Ellery Channing, and Theodore Parker, thought of themselves as staunch Christians. As a matter of fact, our religion emerged from the radical left wing of the Protestant Reformation. You Christians, my friends, were here long before the rest of us. But that was then, and you may say, and this is now. Aren't there only a handful of self-professed Christians left in our churches today? Well, if you believe this, you are mistaken. The Christians among us are a minority, yes, but they constitute much more than a mere handful. Some belong to steepled parish churches in New England where ancient Puritan covenants are faithfully recited. The Lord's Prayer is a standard part of the worship, and communion is offered every Sunday. Others, however, belong to congregations where the Bible is seldom read. No cross is evident, and the form of worship differs widely from the order of service in traditional Christian churches. The Unitarians of the 19th century developed a motto which, to a limited extent, still holds true today. Quote, "In the East, a Unitarian must be a Christian and may be a liberal. But in the West, a Unitarian must be a liberal and may be a Christian." Good quote. So, in response to the question, can I be a Christian and a UU too? My reply is a resounding yes. In fact, quite a few of our ministers are avowed Christians, and there's an organized interest group affiliated with the UUA called the Unitarian Universalist Christian Fellowship. This is nothing new, of course. It's been around for years, quite a bit longer, by the way, than the covenant of UU pagans. Yet in some of our congregations, members feel free to engage in gratuitous Christian bashing, and if you're on the receiving end, this sort of thing can be very painful. Leon Spencer, who's a member of the Board of Trustees of the UUA and a Christian, says, quote, "I feel some pain because of how I hear some of my friends describe Christians. Their definitions just do not fit me and many others who call themselves UU Christians. I find myself dealing with an old issue. It used to be, how can I be black and American at the same time? Now it is, how can I be a UU and a Christian at the same time?" It's interesting that if I say I am a Christian in either a traditional Christian setting or in a UU setting, I get bombarded with the same questions and must face a test of beliefs, questions such as, do you believe in the Trinity? No. Is your belief based on the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ? No. Have you ever been saved? From what? So how can you be a UU and a Christian? There is no conflict for me. Unitarian Universalism and its principles and purposes allow me to be the kind of Christian I always wanted to be. Thomas Wintle, another UU Christian who's also a minister and executive director of the UU Christian Fellowship, has written, quote, "The point we need to make is this. There is more than one way to be a Christian. Jesus said that in God's house there are many mansions, and that suggests to me that there are many varieties in the household of Christian faith. Some people have been so burned by their experience with fundamentalist or fundamentalism that they then reject all Christianity. Their experience with one segment of Christianity colors their perspective about it in general. If one's experiences are primarily with narrow-minded, self-righteous, arrogant folk, then it's not surprising that one projects that onto the rest of us. We get blamed for guilt by association. But that isn't my brand of Christianity. Christianity is a family. And like any family, it comes complete with crazy uncles and cousins who are not our favorite relatives. There are fundamentalists, yes, but they are not the same as liberal Christians. Let's imagine for a moment that one day your child came home from school and asked, "Mom, Dad, are we Christians?" What would your answer be? Would you respond with a quick yes or no, depending on how you feel toward Baptists on that particular day? Or would you be prepared with a more carefully thought out reply? If so, it might go something like this. Well, some UUs call themselves Christians, and some don't, but that's okay. Some Christians believe that because Jesus was killed a long time ago, God will forgive our sins, that is, all the bad things we do. Other people who call themselves Christians believe what Jesus taught while he was alive, that we should try to be loving and kind and help each other. Most UU Christians are the second kind. They think that Jesus' teachings are more important than the fact that he was killed. Some may find comfort in believing Jesus is the Son of God, showing forth the mercy and love of God, bringing assurance of salvation. To others of us, this belief has become strange and unreal, and we no longer find comfort in it. This does not mean Jesus ceases to be important for us. Jesus is to us a symbol of our right to have confidence in ourselves and in our fellows. If Jesus was a human being like you and me, if he could rise to beauty, dignity, understanding, and mercy, then perhaps others can, and there's hope for us. If he could just sacrifice himself for a better world, then others will find in themselves a similar nobility. Another way of saying the same thing is the well-worn phrase, "You Christians believe in the religion of Jesus rather than the religion about Jesus." And there's no question about how Jesus himself saw religion. He said that our two greatest duties are to love God with all our heart, mind, and soul, and our neighbors as ourselves. He also said that true religion consists of feeding the hungry, clothing the naked, caring for the sick, visiting prisoners, and demanding justice for those who are despised, rejected, and poor. According to John Dominic Crossan, one of the foremost New Testament scholars writing today, Jesus was nothing less than a religious revolutionary who proclaimed a message of radical inclusiveness. And for this very reason, he continues to fire the imagination of Unitarian Universalists who are committed to the cause of social justice. Yet when we mock and ridicule the Christians among us, we're not living up to our own tradition of a free faith that respects the right of each individual to conduct a personal search for meaning and to come to his or her own conclusions in matters of belief. Instead of helping our Christian brothers and sisters reclaim the teachings of Jesus from the distortions of fundamentalism, we criticize them for it. There's no doubt about it, my friends. This is one of our biggest blind spots. As Jesus himself said, "You hypocrite, first take the log out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to take the speck out of your brother's eye." Of course, there are many things in traditional Orthodox Christianity that ought to be criticized. But there's also much in the Christian tradition that deserves to be rescued. Unfortunately, many present-day UUs have no basis on which to make that judgment because we're ignorant of our own liberal Christian heritage. Both Unitarianism and Universalism began as new ways of being Christian. They represented honest efforts to reform and reformulate Christianity to save the best and eliminate the worst. But many UUs today have simply given up the effort. By default, we've allowed the fundamentalists to seize the name Christian and place their own exclusionary stamp on it. In the name of religious tolerance, inclusiveness, and diversity, I think it would be a wonderful idea for us to have a local chapter, and he's talking about Spindletop at Beaumont. I know that we already have at least a few UU Christians in this congregation. It would be a marvelous way to reach other Christians, people who've grown disillusioned with the doctrines and practices of Orthodox churches, but aren't willing to walk away from the teachings of Jesus Christ himself. Mike asked, if anyone here is interested in starting a local Christian fellowship, please talk to me after the service. We have a pagan study group, why not a Christian study group? So the next time you hear someone ask, can I be a Christian and a UU too? What are you going to say? Why, yes, of course you can. Christians are welcome here and always have been. They're the salt that adds flavor to our theological stew, and their presence is a blessing on our community. We just seem to have forgotten that for a while. So be it. Well, please rise in body or spirit to join